If you've been around for a while, you might have noticed something different in how you feel and listen to music. How the music experience has fundamentally changed. And this change has happened roughly over the last 20 years. Has this been a good thing or a bad thing? Hi everyone, I'm Paul Crayson and you're watching Music Mentions. Today we're going to talk about a topic that involves music media and how we feel about our music listening experience. These two things are related. So I'm going to do kind of a deep dive and we're going to take a look at some charts and we're going to talk about physical media, digital media, and more importantly, how that has changed how you may feel about listening to music today. Let's start off by taking a look at this graphic. So I really like this graphic. It shows the various physical and digital media over the decades. What you'll notice here is that vinyl records were the dominating format back in the 70s. You also had 8-track tapes, definitely had cassette tapes, became very popular in the 80s, early 90s. And then the dominance of CDs, that yellow mountain, made a shit ton of money for the music companies. And then there's a little sliver there if you see ringtones. Anyone remember ringtones? Yeah. Did you spend money on ringtones? Me too. Then around 2003, you'll also notice that downloads became quite popular. A lot of piracy was going on. Napster, we all remember Napster. I'm sure Lars Ulrich remembers Napster. And then in the early 2010s, streaming came on the scene. And since that time, it has been the dominating format. So you'll see here over the last several decades, we've had a real shift. But there's been an extreme shift in the last 20 years when we changed from physical media to digital media dominance. So after looking at that graphic, let's talk a little bit about the physical media itself. I'm going to start off with the artwork. The importance of album artwork really can't be overemphasized or overstated. It is part and parcel of the entire music listening experience. Album artwork can truly be stunning or can be minimalistic, can be depressing, can be scary. Album artwork can give you a feeling about how that music will sound. Some listeners will even buy an album simply based on the artwork alone. Now, I've never done this. I've always wanted to know something about the artist or something about the music or having heard at least a few songs before I put my money down on an album. But it's quite common that people will just buy an album based on the fact that they love that artwork. Now, there's no doubt that the best way and the best media to view that artwork is in the 12-inch by 12-inch vinyl album format. It gives you enough size, it gives you enough space to see the details, to really have that artistic vision as the artist intended. How many of you have ever put on an album and then picked up the artwork, settled down, and while the music was playing, poured over every detail on the cover, on the back cover, in the gatefold, just spent time reading, looking, inspecting even the artwork for clues or insight about the music or maybe the band itself. It could be a psychedelic painting, something like Santana's Abraxas, or it could be a band photo like the Ramones' first album. There's something about that cover that changes the way that you feel about the music that you're listening to. Tell me I'm wrong. If you think I'm wrong, tell me in the comments. Let's have a discussion about it. Another thing that you may not have thought about in the past, how the album artwork itself actually manifests in its fans. So you can go to a show and often you'll see fans dressed in some kind of regalia or clothing that their heroes wore on an album cover. Album artwork is incredibly important. All right, now let's shift to liner notes. So liner notes used to be quite popular, especially in the 60s and 70s, but for some reason, we don't get many liner notes anymore. As a fan, I always appreciated liner notes. The more that I could learn about the album and the band and how the record was made, the better. Yes, I'm a geek that way. However, as media shifted from albums to cassettes to CDs and now streaming, liner notes, not to mention album artwork, has been diminished. As music media changed over the years, the importance and prominence of liner notes also changed. Now, there was a precipitous drop-off on the popularity of liner notes, it seems, sometime in the 70s. It seemed like artists wanted to become a little bit more mysterious and maybe not give so much information, so many clues. Zeppelin's fourth album, perfect example of that. Very spare, bare bones. Have you ever tried reading liner notes on cassettes or on CDs? Almost impossible without a magnifying glass. But for those albums that do have liner notes, there isn't a better format than vinyl records, simply by the sheer physical size. Now I want to talk a little bit about music discovery, how we discover new music. So it used to be, especially in the 70s and also in the 60s, radio was the dominating format. Most people really found out about new music through the radio. Other ways that they found out about new music was through siblings, through friends, through magazines, articles, browsing in a record store, or seeing a band live and never having heard their music before, and then after the show, going out and buying the album. Now, a lot of the way that we discover music is different, although still your friends, siblings, news articles, magazine articles. But now there are streaming platforms and algorithm-based playlists. We're now drowning in options, but it can be pretty overwhelming for someone that wants to hear something new, but they don't have the time, just can't commit the energy to go and search and hunt for something that's going to turn them on. Choice paralysis, it's a real thing. However, never in history has there been a better time for the true music fan to discover new music. Drinking from the fire hose of these streaming platforms can actually be very satisfying when it comes to finding new music, especially for rabid music fans like myself. Yes, you can get overwhelmed. Yes, there are so many artists, so many choices, so many labels. It can seem like an avalanche, but at least you have those options. And if you're patient enough, and let's say you find a new artist who just released their first album, and you're intrigued by the cover, well, now you can listen to it without necessarily having to buy the whole album or waiting for a song to come on the radio. It does take a little time to separate the wheat from the chaff. Unfortunately, for many casual music listeners, doing the research and going out there and spending time and clicking on an album and listening to songs and then clicking on the next album and hunting for something that they really like, they simply don't have the time. And I get it. I understand that. There are still curated playlists out there. There are humans that put together certain playlists. Do you want to hear new music from last week, new rock music, new classical music? There's a playlist for that. So I get it. It's easy for them to want to click on that playlist and just press play. For me, I very rarely listen to curated playlists or algorithm-based playlists. I'll put playlists together for myself, especially for something like working out. Typically, if I am putting together a playlist, at least I know that I'm going to love the music that's in there and love every song. Another change that has been fairly significant in how we listen to and experience music is the difference between listening to an album versus listening to individual songs or singles from that album. So once again, album listening versus playlist listening. Artists, I think, have stopped caring, not all of them, but many have really stopped caring about presenting an entire album of comprehensive vision. What they'd rather do is have an album of 3-minute songs that have been formulated to be a hit. Might not be any sense of continuity. There might not be any kind of overarching method or theme. However, for many artists, the way they intend you to listen to the music is to listen to the entire album. Back in the day of physical media dominance, especially with vinyl records, that was the common way to listen to music. You typically, at a minimum, listen to one entire side of the album, if not the whole album, in one listening session. You didn't jump from one song on one album, take that off the turntable, grab another album, throw that onto the turntable. That typically didn't happen. There were things like turntable record changers, if you folks remember that, where you would stack albums on top of each other, and as one album was finished, the tone arm would move back to its resting spot, the next album would drop, and the tone arm would start the next album. But still, you're listening to an entire side. Listening to an entire album is my preference simply because it feels like I get more from that music listening experience, especially when I'm actively listening. And what I mean by active listening is when you put something on, you hit play, put the stylus down on the record, you sit on the couch or you're in your favorite lounge chair, close your eyes and let the music engulf you. You don't have a TV on, you're not reading a newspaper, you're not browsing on your phone, you're actively listening to the album. It just feels like a richer musical experience. Let me know if you agree or you don't. I wouldn't be surprised, however, if there are folks out there that disagree with me about the importance of listening to albums versus single songs. For me, and obviously for a lot of artists, they feel a little differently. They'd like for you to listen to the entire album. So now let's talk about physical music ownership and emotional attachment. These days, most music ownership is really a thing of the past, although there is hope, and I'll get to that. Essentially, we don't own music anymore. We rent music from the streaming companies. This is especially true for the youngsters and the kids out there. When you're young, you tend not to have a lot of money. One thing to consider about physical music ownership, the nostalgia that can come with it. When you buy an album or even a cassette or a CD, oftentimes that experience of buying that album, putting it on, listening to it for the first time, that kind of gets stuck in your head. So then years later, when you select that album, it'll bring up memories of when you bought it, when you listened to it the first time, if someone gifted it to you, if it was a Christmas present. I know I'm not the only one that has experienced this. So there is kind of an emotional attachment to the physical music media that we buy. You don't get that when you're renting. And that experience can be pretty special and emotional. I've known a lot of folks over the years that have sold their physical music collections. I'm sure you probably know at least one or two people in your life that used to have a large vinyl collection, cassette collection, CD collection. When digital music really came around, they recorded that music, put it all on hard drives, sold off the collection, so they don't have to worry about storage. They don't have to worry about moving that collection, which can be a real pain in the ass. And invariably, when people have done that, I hear a lot of people telling me, man, I really regret getting rid of my records, or I had such a kick-ass CD collection, and I don't know what I was thinking, but I missed that collection. I missed those CDs. There's a lot of regret about selling off a collection that you've worked on for many, many years. I always encourage people, unless they absolutely, positively have to get rid of their collection for some reason, just don't do it. Put it in an attic, put it in a storage area, give it to a friend to hold for a while or a family member if you're moving, but don't sell it off. You don't want to experience that type of regret. All right, so now we have to talk about some of the negatives of owning physical media, and I already touched on this. So what do you do with all of these albums or CDs or cassettes? You eventually start running out of space, especially if you're an avid music collector and a music listener. Having moved several times in recent years, I'm acutely aware of this issue. I've had to move my vinyl collection and CD collection more times than I care to state here. It's a pain in the ass every time that I have to do it. I take very good care of my collection, so I have to pack it carefully, make sure that everything's in there tight, everything's labeled. You have to unpack it, you have to put it back on the rack, and it just sucks. Vinyl records are heavy. For those of you with large collections, you know exactly what I'm talking about. For those of you that have stayed in one place, have a home that you've lived in for years, if not decades, I suspect one of the reasons you don't want to move may be because moving that entire collection seems like such a daunting task. So with all that said around how physical media can be a real pain in the ass when it comes to storage and space and moving, do I still recommend it? Fuck yes. I know that many of you out there remember Napster, and there were other download services or download software that came to rise in the late 1990s and early 2000s, where essentially you could download music, albeit compressed MP3 files. You could download these files onto your computer's hard drive and play them back. I know many of you out there, especially if you're a little older, you remember Napster, you remember the entire piracy controversy, you remember Lars Ulrich being an asshole about Napster. Napster reached its peak popularity in February of 2001 when it had approximately 80 million users on its software. That's an amazing number of people illegally pirating and downloading music. Guilty. I was one of those people. Put the cuffs on. But it was incredibly hard to resist as a music fan. So yes, I was one of the 80 million. How many hard drives did I fill? I lost count. So for the music fan, Napster really was kind of a miracle. However, as I was going to find out, this was kind of a double-edged sword. I'm talking about the music experience. Although you had all of this free music, listening to that music seemed somehow cheapened. It just seemed like something was lost. Some type of vibe was missing for me. Much different than going to a store, paying money for an album, coming home and listening to it. Let's talk about quantity versus quality. So with streaming, we have all the quantity that we want. We pretty much have every album at our fingertips anytime that we want it. However, with that quantity, there's been a trade-off. The trade-off that I'm speaking about is the compression of the audio files themselves into an MP3 format. Obviously, the worst offender here is Spotify. Spotify still compresses their files into MP3s. Now, the sound of Spotify is actually pretty decent, especially if you're in a noisy environment like a car or a work area or somewhere where the music is playing in the background and you're not really paying 100% attention to it. I think Spotify is fine. There are other services, other streaming services that I prefer. In the past, I've used Tidal, which has CD quality or high-res files. Currently, I use Qobuz, which is a French company, basically CD quality, minimum of a CD quality, and then it goes up from there to high-resolution files. I have some high-resolution audio equipment so I can really hear the difference in the sound, and so that matters to me. Music just sounds better on high res. I won't go into this very deeply right now, but for me, my preferred music format is vinyl records. I prefer the sound. There's a lot of back and forth amongst music fans and audiophiles. To my ears, I prefer the music that I hear on vinyl records, even music that was originally recorded on a digital source. So I'm going to leave this for another video in the future, I hope, and I'll explain my thinking around this then. So you have something to look forward to. If you're out there and agree that vinyl records sound better to you as well, let me know in the comments. Let's get a discussion going on that. That's always a good debate, and I'd love to see what people have to say about this. So now I'm going to bring up hope. If you've been paying attention over the last several years, there has been a real change in the format wars, and now vinyl records are the best-selling physical music format. It speaks to the value that records, physical records, actually have over digital files and streaming. And not only has there been a vinyl resurgence, there are now people buying CDs again and buying used CDs. There's even a cassette revival? What the fuck? I'm not a big fan of cassette tapes for sound quality, but it's pretty mind-boggling that cassette tapes are making a comeback as well. Let's take a look at this graphic real quick. This is kind of a simpler representation of the earlier graphic that I had at the start of the video. From 1972 through 2022, forget that projected there. In 22, vinyl records were the #1 format. But it's really interesting. So the bigger circles here, by the way, are vinyl records. The smaller circles are CDs, and then of course you can see the cassettes, and you can see the dominance there of the vinyl from 72 through 82, and then 83 to 91 are cassettes, and then here came the CD juggernaut, 1992 through 2019, and then vinyl has come back. This really is a beautiful thing, and it gives me a lot of hope for the future that physical formats aren't going to disappear like the dinosaurs. The unfortunate side of this is if you've tried buying any used vinyl recently, you've probably seen some outrageous prices, especially on very clean issues of 60s and 70s albums. People are asking astronomical values, really silly values. An album that maybe 10 years ago, a used vinyl record that you could buy for maybe $5 in a record shop, may be going for 10 times as much these days. Kids are going out there and buying used records. There are people like myself, and I'll talk about this shortly, that got back into vinyl after being out of it for a while, that are now buying records again. So towards the beginning of this video, I mentioned that I would talk a little bit about my journey in regards to physical music media, streaming, what's it all mean, what has my music experience been over the last 20 years. So here goes. Being the rabid music fan that I am, I consider myself a multimedia guy. And what that means is I have CDs, I have vinyl albums, and I have streaming. And I have those hard drives full of Napster files sitting somewhere. I'm never going to listen to those again. I even had some 8-tracks in the late 70s. I remember 2 of those albums off the top of my head that I had. Grease, the soundtrack, Jazz by Queen. Love that album, by the way. Back in roughly 1986 or so, I changed from being a vinyl guy to a CD guy. In 86, I went all in on digital music and CDs simply because, boy, they sounded great. At the time, I had a pretty shitty turntable and cartridge. CDs sounded a lot better because I didn't get the noise. I didn't get the surface noise of the vinyl. I didn't get the pops and the clicks and the scratches. So I went all in. And I enjoyed CDs. I still enjoy CDs. I pretty much bought CDs exclusively from about 86 to around 2011, 2012 or thereabouts. And then I rediscovered vinyl. I started listening again to my old vinyl, and boy, the bug bit me hard. I upgraded my turntable. I've upgraded a turntable actually several times over the last 10, 11 years or so. So I'm all in. I'm back in to vinyl. I was out in the desert for a while, in the CD desert for about 26 years. Now I'm back into vinyl, and I couldn't be happier. I also did own a few cassettes back in the 80s, predominantly for use in the car. But once again, like 8-track tapes for me, I had a handful of those. I think I still have those cassettes. I'm not sure where they are, but I'm pretty sure they're in a box in storage somewhere. So I will never sell my music collection. I hope I never have to sell my music collection, but I don't intend to. And, when I pass this mortal coil and I'm gone, my collection will go to my kids, who I trust will love that collection as much as I do and will take very good care of it into the future. So I'm going to wrap things up and just attempt to answer the question that I kind of posed at the beginning, which is, has all of these music media changes over the last 25 years or so, have they been a good thing for the music listening experience, or has it been a overall bad thing? And I don't think the answer to that question is that simple. So the good part of all of this is the fact that physical media has seen this resurgence over the last few years. I love it. I absolutely love that kids are getting into vinyl records. Half of the vinyl records that are sold out there are sold to people that don't even own a turntable. Think about that for a little bit. There's so much value that half of the records that are sold aren't even being put on a turntable, at least not right away. They're either being displayed, or the music fan just loves the artwork, loves the concept of owning the music. I can, handle the record and take a look at the pictures and read the liner notes if there are any. I think it's an awesome thing. And even the cassette resurgence, I think any physical media resurgence, I think this is a good thing, barring the storage problems, of course. So there's good and bad. So thanks for watching this video. I'm Paul Crayson. This is Music Mentions. If you like the content, want to see similar content like this in the future on this channel, please subscribe. Hit the like button, hit the notifications so you'll know when my new videos come up, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.